Well, thank you, Brother Elliott. I think you're probably owed a barbecue lunch or something. There's a place right down the road. I'm sure your local preacher can take you there. I thought only Don Truex had a problem with names, but now I know. All preachers have memory problems. Sure, I'm glad I don't have that problem. It's good to be here with you all tonight. Always good to be with this group from time to time. I appreciate it very much, Josh reaching out to me about coming over here on a date this summer. I appreciate the shepherd's confidence and allowing that to go forward, and I appreciate you being here. This congregation is very close to my family, even though we're not here a lot. My daughter was here quite a bit 5 or 6 years ago as she finished up. As soon as she got her driver's license, she was gone. And so she was worshiping here as a senior in high school and while she was in college down the road for a year or so. And so we're always, I've always been felt very indebted to this congregation for taking care of her during those years. And so thank you. We are looking tonight first, I want to look at the very first chapter of the Bible and also John 1, because I want to think about first things. First things are very important. First things are always the foundational things. It goes without saying. It's by definition, first things are foundational things. And when you think about foundational things, you think about something you can trust. If you can't trust it, it's not going to be much of a foundation. If you build a house, famously, and that foundation is not solid, it's not going to last long. You try to build a relationship without trust, it won't last long. You try to be a Christian without trusting the biblical text, it won't last long. That's where things begin. And sometimes that's where things end for people. So what we're really talking about here is trusting in the biblical foundation, and that starts logically for us in Genesis 1. We're talking about the authenticity, really, of the biblical text. In comparison, particularly tonight, I want to look at that in terms of the Bible as opposed to just historical works of men. But if you look at Genesis 1, and we're told right there, in the beginning verse 1, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and void, the darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the waters. And then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness, and God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, one day. And if you can't get past those 5 verses, believing in that, you're going to have a hard time with the rest of the text. Is that authentic? Can you trust that? Is that a foundation? Go further with me. Go to John 1. It's no accident that inspired by the Spirit, when the Gospel of John is written down, sometime, although the dates vary, sometime between AD 90, AD 100, maybe a little earlier, we just don't know, but it's sometime in that era, if you accept that the Gospel of John is the 4th of the Gospel accounts. John 1 parallels, fittingly, Genesis 1. Good students probably realize that, but if you're new to the Bible, it does parallel it. Read John 1 with me. In the beginning, John tells us, in the beginning was the Word. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God, and all things came into being through him. And apart from him, nothing came into being that has come into being. In him, in verse 4, we're told, in him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. First 5 verses of John 1, and that's your foundation for the Gospel of John. If you have a hard time with the first 5 verses of the Gospel of John, you will have a hard time with the rest of the Gospel account. The great miraculous works of Jesus will not ring true to you if you don't accept the first 5 verses of John 1. The great miraculous works of the Father, the mighty hand of God that brought the people out of Egypt, you will not see that as authentic, as something trustworthy if you can't get past the first 5 verses of Genesis 1. So what we're really talking about is, do we really trust the biblical text? Can we trust it? I know you had somebody named Britnell here a few nights ago. I'm pretty sure he was probably truthful with a small t as he tried to explain the capital T truth to you using archaeology. I'm assuming that's what he did. Noticed on your website Barry was here. Is that right? I get that all wrong. He was on the screen. See, you wouldn't even come face to face. I am here. But you know, Barry goes to Israel, and those things that he does are remarkable because they point out time and again the archaeological proofs for the biblical account. And see, this is why you can trust it. And this is why you can, and here again, this is why you can trust it. Those are amazing things. I don't think it should be lost on any of us that God allows those things to happen. God allows those things to be uncovered. God allows us to use our good brains that He's given us, we hope good brains most days, to really understand those things, to put them in historical context, to make sense of the past, and to really prove then, in a sense, the biblical record is truth, capital T truth, and not just truthful, like we try to teach history on our best days. I always tell students first day in class, and I haven't changed my story in 23 years, so if you're sitting here and sat in class with me, I'm sorry, there's nothing new, right? I always tell them, you want capital T truth, go down the hall and find a Bible class. David McClister will teach you about the truth. You want something that's truthful? We'll try to get to that here. But the reason why it's only truthful is because it's man-made. It is going by its nature to be flawed. You want the truth, go down the hall. And you'll find the truth, because that's their business, to teach the truth. Well, what Barry does is show the archaeological proofs for the historical Bible, the historical text. And so we've got some reason, we look back at archaeology, and we look back at comparisons with other civilizations, that the Bible actually tells the truth, that the foundational things we find in Genesis 1 and John 1 are authentic. That's a hard sell to most of the world, for a lot of reasons, some of which I'll get here tonight, but that in the beginning business, that's mighty important. The authenticity has to be shown to people. You know, history is endlessly interesting. A biblical text is history. It is the most truthful, again, the truth that you're going to find when it comes to historical text. It is an historical document. It gives you a keyhole. It gives you a window on the past, like any historical document does. The Bible never claims to tell you everything there is to know about the past. It doesn't do that. That's not God's purpose. Most of you realize that. We forget that sometimes. And then we feel challenged when people say, well, what about this and what about that the Bible doesn't tell me about? Doesn't mean that it didn't happen. Doesn't mean there isn't evidence for those things happening. Last time I checked, Alexander the Great's nowhere in the Bible, and yet Alexander the Great existed. And so the idea that the Bible's supposed to tell everything is false. You get a window into the past about things that we need to know to live a life of faith, things that we need to know so we can get back to the Father in heaven. That's what we're told, and nothing more. It's interesting. It's fascinating. It's also the most truthful thing you're ever going to read. History itself, small t, man's accounts, endlessly interesting as well. Some people have said history teaches us to behave better. I think there's some truth to that. History teaches us how to behave better. It does that some days. But also history is frequently abused, man-made history. Y'all are aware of that. You know, sometimes people actually write things that aren't the truth. Are you aware of that? I mean, you think about that. How easily abused is history? It's hard to abuse mathematics. I know they're trying to, but they're going to have a hard time getting around 2 + 2 = 4. I know they're trying, but probably that's not going to happen. Square root of 25 is 5, right? Get that right? Good. But I'll tell you what, you can abuse the past. It's hard to abuse hard science. It's hard to make up what physics actually consists of and how you explain. It's hard to get around physics with calculus. It's hard to get around hard math. It's easy to abuse the past. You just make up a story that somebody might believe and just might sell. That's called historical fiction. And so history is frequently abused. The Bible, in contrast, is the most spectacular record of the past ever assembled. Over a long span of time by multiple authors. It would take a greater conspiracy theorist than Dan Brown to try to come up with some sort of way that people could do that over the course of thousands of years. That's just not going to happen. You ever notice when you were kids or when you were adults that it's hard to keep a story together? Somewhere in this room sits Renee Anderson. He knows how stories change from person to person to person to person, and you never get the same account from. And Renee and I have worked together on those things. It's amazing how stories change. How in the world can you keep a story together over thousands and thousands of years and make it consistent and make the prophecies come true just as how they were described in the Old Testament, have them come true in the New Testament. How in the world are you going to do that? And so conspiracy theorists exist in man-made things, but the biblical record is hardly that. It's not that at all. It is the most spectacularly put together historical document that you can find. Amazing stories. But this business of authenticity and things about being in the beginning, first things, that's the vital thing. There's your foundations in the beginning. There's your principles that God loves us. When you go through the Gospel of John, it comes across again and again. There's the mission of God to bring us home again. You find that throughout the text. You know, we do that in man-made things. We put great emphasis on charters and licenses and diplomas and certificates and constitutions because they provide framework, or they show something's been verified, that someone actually knows something, or a business actually has the right to exist, or that a marriage actually is legal, whatever it may be. You take a dollar bill, and those things I think still exist. Sometimes I ask classes, anybody have a dollar bill in their pocket? And somebody have actually extracts one. 18-year-olds still carry dollar bills some days. You take out a dollar bill, how do you know it's real? How do you know they didn't just print it somewhere in somebody's back room, right? It's called counterfeiting last time I checked. How careful are we about making sure that dollar bill is authentic? Because if it's not, if you can't verify that it's real, that it's actually worth something, what happens to the whole monetary system? But you have doubt in it, and it crumbles. And the same thing is true with historical things and historical documents. If you can pull at the threads and show that it's not verifiable, that it somehow is not authentic, then everything falls apart. That's why when we teach others, first things are important. And it's hard for people to get away from the notion that somehow there is capital T truth. That the Bible isn't just another historical fiction document. And you find all kinds of things written to proclaim that it is when it's not. And so, how do you show that? Authentic versus counterfeit things. It's important that you do. That leads to the respect and the adherence to the values that's in the document. If you have a diploma and it's just been printed off somewhere, you might have a piece of paper, it's worth nothing. You got a dollar bill, it's been printed off somewhere, if it's not authentic, it's worth nothing. And the same way with a religious text. It's that way with a legal document. Why are people so careful with an American Constitution? A couple days ago, we thought about our independence a good bit. We tend to do that every year. Some of us get a little weird about that, think about it more than once a year. Why is that we put so much emphasis on a written document? And people go, how many people have been and seen the archives, National Archives? How many people have seen the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence? Yeah, you keep it under glass. Ma'am? I thought somebody said something. I thought you said you didn't like it, you're moving to Canada. I don't know what you said. No, I'm just kidding. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, and it's amazing. They go to great lengths to keep that document secure. Locking it up, making sure it's safe, making sure it's in a unit that it's not going to degrade over time, because that document's vital. That's our framework for our government. And the government's not supposed to go beyond the framework. Not supposed to. And the reason why we've kept it together, I think, other than God's providence, which is the key piece, but the reason why we've kept it together otherwise for over 200 and going on 50 years now is because we have that framework. So it's interesting to me. We put great emphasis on that, and we understand that. But that leads to the respect for our laws, and the respect as much as we can have it some days for a form of government, and also adherence to the kind of authority that it wields and it gives to people. And so it's important that you show the authenticity of something. Make sure that it's not counterfeit. If the document, whatever it is somehow discounted, disregarded, or rejected, all kinds of things can happen. Then what you find is what? Something else is going to fill the void. Hey, look, We all decide the dollar bills are worth nothing. We all decide that the American dollar is kaput. Guess what? Something else would fill the void. Something else would fill the void. You tell me that's not true in faith. You have somebody that rejects the Bible. Does that mean they believe in nothing? Does that mean they just have no belief in anything at all? They fill it with something. They will fill it with something. Because human beings are desperate to know their identity and to have it spiritually. One of the fastest growing groups that's often been said in the last 10 years is people that say they are spiritual but not religious. You've heard that probably. People are looking for something. They are desperate for something. Before people knew about God, before people had the biblical record, they turned to things like mythology. Joseph Campbell, the great comparative mythologist from the late 20th century, used to say that people needed mythology. They needed something to believe in. I think that's true. Absent a Bible, people will look for something. They will fill that spiritual hole with something. And so verification of the biblical record, it's pretty important. And for us to be sure about what we study and what we learn from and what we stake our spiritual lives on, that's important. What Barry does is vital. What other people do to show the biblical text is real is vital. But I'll tell you, the Bible is its own best defense every day of the week as well. But verification is important. It's fundamental. We do that with weights and measures. We do that with currency. We talk about legitimacy of something because acceptance means something has authority. And absent the verification or doubting that verification means a vacuum in authority. And that vacuum will be filled. People stop believing the Constitution is in effect or the Declaration of Independence is void. There'd be something else to fill it. Probably wouldn't just be anarchy. Might be, but probably not. So it's important that we have that. Now, that's the reason why people of faith, people just like you and me, but also people of other religious beliefs, will become dogmatic. And of course, we justify that, and with good reason. But you find that, don't you, in Islam? You find that in Judaism. You find that in Buddhism, what documents they've got, or beliefs they have. They will become very defensive of that because that's everything to them. You undermine the authority of those documents, you undermine their whole system of faith. That is very disturbing. Some of you are like I was. I grew up in a denomination. My brother's a retired Methodist minister. I grew up going to a Methodist congregation. I was baptized in the Presbyterian Church. I've got a certificate somewhere to prove it if you want to see it someday. Put it somewhere. I'm telling you, it is dangerous to people, to their spiritual lives, to undermine the authority of that document. Oh, you weren't really baptized. You mean you weren't really baptized as an infant? That wasn't really. And once you start undermining that, then people get defensive. Then people will get angry. And sometimes people will lash out. What we're challenged to be is rational people. Not just people that justify and try to make up excuses for what we believe. We don't need that. But rationally look at things and show people this is why I believe. And this is how the Bible is verifiable. And this is how it's something that you can trust your spiritual life in. But people will get very defensive about their religious documents, or about images, or about the lack of those. In Islam, they get very defensive of that. Take away all images. That's the reason why relics in Christianity are so venerated. You think about it. What have people done in the past to feel secure in their faith? I mean, their Christian faith, to use that in a broad term. You think about it. How famous is the Holy Grail? When I was a young man, there was a movie that came out. They still show it once in a while. Back when Harrison Ford was probably 50 back then, he was making that movie. He's like 120, still making movies. They're Holy Grail, right? Or what about this? You think about relics like bones of saints. We put no stock in that. You show me a cathedral in Europe, I'll show you a place where they are insistent that there's a relic. One of the most famous is in Cologne, the big, beautiful, double-spired cathedral that American bombers were told not to hit, and so it still stands. And underneath that roof, within a triple sarcophagus, are allegedly the bones of the Magi. You know, there had to be 3 of them, right? I mean, that's something we kind of smirk at, but people really believe that. They put their faith on that. That's a real thing to them. And we don't know what's in those sarcophaguses. But the idea is of the bones of the saints, of the Holy Grail. What about pieces of the true cross? If there were so many pieces of the true cross that actually existed, the cross would reach from here to the moon probably. Everybody wants a piece of the true cross. Those are ways that people try to have a physical manifestation of a spiritual life that makes them feel more secure. Absent a real good understanding of the biblical text, maybe that's where they need to stand in their minds. But that's not what we need. We're called to be people of faith. Archaeology is great. Again, what Barry does is invaluable. Luke Chandler, the same way. What he does is invaluable. Scholars like Tom Hamilton and David McClister, Will Dilbeck, some of the people I work with, they're just fantastic scholars, and they prove time and again the veracity of the biblical record. That's invaluable. And yet we're called to be people of faith at the end of all that. It's fine to have those proofs. It helps convince people. It helps draw people to the gospel, and that's the point, isn't it? To get them home to God. And yet, as people of faith, those are good things, but they're incidental to our belief. For physical people, though, you think about it, for physical people, physical authenticity is always sought. We want something to touch and experience, don't we? We want something to touch and experience. And faith through those physical relics, as it were, is verified by physical evidence. But God does call us to be better than that. Think back to Genesis 1, John 1, those first 5 verses, those 2 great books, and think about the key terms there. You've got the Word, the Logos, and the Light, capital L. Those are the key things. God doesn't say, go out and find a piece of the true cross. God doesn't say, go out and do this or that and gather for yourself physical things so that you can feel better about your faith. God says, this is what I'm about. I bring you light, and that light is the life of men. I bring you this. I bring you the Word. And through the Word, all things are made. Through the Word that was manifested on this earth in the person of Jesus, you can be home in heaven with me. That's what I give you. Now, you going to believe that or not? I'm persuaded He gives us, again, our good brains and our thinking and our intellects so that we can have other proofs. That's fine. Nothing wrong with that. All does great good. That's not where it begins. But as physical people, persuaded God understands we really look for those things. No accident we find them. Now, in comparison, you find physical things. You have the works of people. You know, in Christianity, we don't have shamans. Shamans of mysticism we don't have. We don't have oracles, like the Oracle of Delphi and oracles of pagans. We don't have, like I mentioned, Joseph Campbell in mythology. We have no hero's journey. We don't have that. We have the Lord. We have the Word. We have the light of our Father. And so, still, when you go back to the New Testament, 2,000 years ago, there is an emphasis on documenting things. You have an emphasis on documenting things, a premium on that, especially on the work and the reality and the consequences of the Lord. You think about what you write down. If you wrote down something today, think about or what you texted or put on your phone or put on a sticky note. I bet you 9.5 or 10 times out of 10, it wasn't something irrelevant to your life. You wrote down something that was important. Now take it a step further. When you write to a parent, or if you're a child, if you're a spouse, what you write to your wife, your husband, or if you're a parent, what you write to your child, is it something irrelevant, something you don't care about? Or is it something meaningful? Something that really gets the point across, something that you really need to tell them. Think about the last time you wrote a card, last time you wrote a note, last time you did something like that, especially to someone near and dear to you. You wrote down what was on your heart, what was on your mind so that they were aware, so that they could know how you felt. You were encouraging them, you were reminding them, you were teaching them, you were thanking them, whatever it was. The New Testament accounts are similar, except this. They mean to tell us exactly what we need to know to live a good and holy life to get home to God. And they mean to tell us what we need to know about our Savior's life. And they're written from the heart. And I understand, we all accept, because it's the truth, they're inspired by God. Yet they're written by men. And they're written with great heart. Next time you pick up that New Testament, you think about that. What did they choose to write inspired by the Spirit? What's the Spirit inspire them to write? It's nothing that's irrelevant. It all is incredibly meaningful. Those miracles in the Gospel of John, if you get past those first 5 verses and you're a believer, those 7 great signs, those 7 great wonders, those 7 I am statements, speak volumes about what Jesus is all about. 7 ways he tries to tell us who he is. I am the bread of life. I am this. He tries to tell them. Tries to explain, like a good teacher, repeats himself in different ways. You want miracles? I'll give you miracles. 7 different ways. I am greater than the natural world because I helped create the natural world. And so, especially with the New Testament writings, there's a premium on documenting what Jesus was about and remains about, and what the worship was about, and what it remains about, and what God expects of us as brothers and sisters. So it documents things that are still important to us. Look with me, a good example of this in a contrast to human things. If you look at Luke chapter 1, here's the contrast. I'm going to run way short of time, Josh. This is, I'm going to try to compress it here a little bit, but at any rate, for the rest, I guess you'll have to look up the series that doesn't exist yet. But if you look at Luke chapter 1, first 4 verses, this stands in stark contrast to human writings, especially of the day and time. If you read Plutarch, you read fanciful things, and yet Plutarch is accepted to this day as a document, as a historian of the ancient world. If you read other accounts of other religious groups or faiths, they tell you fanciful things. They don't mean to tell you everything. They mean to make up something that's going to get the point across they want to make. Look how Luke puts it to Theophilus. In Luke chapter 1, Luke writes this. He said, "Inasmuch as many have undertaken to compile an account of the things accomplished among us, just as they were handed down to us by those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and servants of the word, it seemed fitting for me as well, having investigated everything carefully from the beginning, to write it out for you in consecutive order, most excellent Theophilus, so that you may know the exact truth about the things you've been taught." And he goes on from there. That is in stark contrast. To me, that screams about the veracity of the word, because that's just not done in antiquity. Ancient writers would write down many times things like modern writers write down. They'll write down things that are talking points. They'll write down illustrations. They'll come up with fanciful stories. When Plutarch wrote about Alexander the Great that I referenced earlier, he's writing from 300 years after the fact, and his origin story for Alexander the Great is, as he wrote it, as we all know, Alexander the Great's father was descended from Hercules, as we all know. Okay, fine, let's move on. Can you imagine? That's like me telling you, as you all know, I hit a baseball 500 feet earlier today. And you don't believe that? Oh, come on. Some of you have seen me hit a softball before. You know that could happen. In my dreams, maybe. But the idea that Luke says, I'm telling you exactly what you need to know in order, and not just for any reason, but so you can be a believer, so that you can trust in what you've heard. And then he lays it out. Just like a good Greek would, as near as we know, right? As a physician would, right? To most excellent Theophilus. Greeks want things in order. They want things consecutively. They want things to make sense. And so he lays it out that way. Luke's account here, the eyewitnesses of what's happened, putting things down in consecutive order so that you can know the exact truth. That is markedly different. Markedly different. I mentioned earlier, John's supposed to be, by reputation, the latest of the gospel accounts. The most ancient fragment of any of the gospel accounts you may have heard already, based on your summer series, goes back sometime to between 100 and 125 AD, maybe a little earlier. It's found in the University of Manchester, the Rhineland's Library. It was found in the early 1920s. It was actually picked up by accident in a trash heap in Upper Egypt. And it's a little fragment that contains pieces back and front, so we know it was part of a book and not a roll, which meant they put a greater emphasis on it. It's part of the Gospel of John. And it's almost exactly the words that we have today in our English Bibles, translated if you take it from the ancient Greek. Now you think about that. Plutarch we accept. Plutarch's 300 years after the fact, and he's writing about Alexander. We all accept that. People have a hard time accepting the Bible, but the oldest fragments we have of it are within a generation or so of the Lord's life, within 2 generations easily. If that's the 4th gospel account that was recorded, how close to the facts was Luke writing? If he's taking it from eyewitnesses, when do you get the truest story? Whether it's Renee trying to beat the truth or convince people to tell the truth, right? Or whether it's a parent in here trying to figure out what their kid did that day. Do you ask immediately after or 10 days after? The closer to the event, the better, right? The closer to the event, the better. The gospel accounts give us a window on what the Lord did pretty close to the occurrence of those events. We know that's true based on the evidence. We don't have to guess at that. Again, if the Gospel of John, Upper Egypt, how long would it take to get? I realize they put things on boats and sailed them around. You know, we get things around today. But if you think it got to Upper Egypt and they found this fragment from, fittingly, Jesus' trial before Pilate, is what that fragment's from. You know it had to have been copied over a couple of times before that at least. John had to have been written before 100 AD. We all accept that Washington existed, George Washington. Thomas Jefferson existed. We all accept that John Adams existed. Nobody saw him in here. We're much more than 2 generations removed. But people have a hard time with the biblical record. And you ask yourself why that is. And the obvious answer is what? If I accept the biblical record, if I accept the first 5 verses of Genesis, if I accept the first 5 verses of John, I've got a choice to make. I've got to go further. And if I accept the mighty hand of God bringing those Hebrews out of Egypt, if I accept those 7 I am statements and miracles, great signs that Jesus did, if I accept the Gospel of Luke and Matthew and Mark, which all relate to each other, the synoptics are beautiful in how they weave together. If I accept that, then I've got a choice. And if I accept the authority of God, if I have no way to discount the biblical record, then I'm either going to have to change my life or I'm going to have to turn my back on what is truly capital T truth, with all the consequences that has. And that's why people have a hard time with it, and that's why they'll deny everything from archaeology to those papyrus fragments they found that are legitimate. You can't do anything about that, by the way. You can pray for those people. You can try to work for them. But at the end of it, it's up to each and every individual, us too in this room, every day to accept that. Because that's what our faith's based on. In reality, really, as we think about this, all history, and the Bible is an historical document again. Those 4 biographies of Jesus are not 4 biographies. They are 4 accounts of good news, gospel accounts, that look at Jesus from 4 different angles in many ways. And they give us different angles on the Savior's life and what was most important for the Spirit, through the Spirit, for us to know. That's what they do for us. But that means things were chosen. That's similar to human history. All history is a chosen thing. You can't write down everything. History is all about choosing. All biographies are incomplete. All human histories are incomplete because it's hard to recount everything. History's all about stories. It's all about people. That's what the Bible is. It is an amazing thing to study. It comes alive. It is flesh and blood. David McCullough, great teacher and student of history and writer of history, David McCullough said one time, if you tell me that the king died and then the queen died, that's just a sequence of events. Anybody can do that. He said, but if you tell me the king died of illness and the queen died of heartache, then you've got a story. Then you've got flesh and blood. Then you've got something that people can remember. If you look at the biblical record, that's what it is. It is flesh and blood. These are real people. David, that great warrior king, had good and bad in him, just like all people. The Savior, as he walked the earth, was the only perfect person, and you can see it through his actions. You can see it through his words. But in reality, all history, certainly all biography, is incomplete. It's all about choosing. It's all about choosing. Look at the Gospel of John one more time with me as we wrap it up tonight. Gospel of John, chapter 20 and 21. We know it's incomplete. We wish we had more, and that draws people into error. The idea of hidden gospels, the Gnostic writers, it's all about people wanting to know more. John chapter 20 and John chapter 21 tells us in little pieces about why there's just no more that we need to know. What we have is complete, as complete as it needs to be. John chapter 20, right at the end of the chapter. Right at the end of the chapter, after Thomas realizes, indeed, Jesus has been resurrected. In verse 30, John chapter 20, the gospel writer tells us, therefore, many other signs Jesus also performed in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book, but these have been written, so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name. Anybody ever challenges you and says, well, the Bible doesn't tell me everything I need to know. The Bible tells you what you need to know. But in no way, shape, or form does it ever set out to tell you everything. That's, first of all, not necessary. Secondly, probably not possible for humans to comprehend. Look down at the end of John chapter 21. After Jesus feeds the disciples, right, and tells Peter the kind of sacrifice that he's going to have to endure. You will follow me, Peter, remember. You will follow me. And then he challenges John, don't worry about Peter. Or he challenges Peter, don't worry about John. You follow me. After those things, we're told that Peter saw Jesus. Asked him about John. Verse 22, Jesus said, if I want him to remain till I come again, what's that to you? You follow me. So in verse 23, the gospel writer tells us, the saying went out among the brethren that the disciple would not die. Yet Jesus did not say to him that he wouldn't die, but only if I want him to remain until I come, what is that to you? Then John verifies that this is the disciple who is testifying to you these things and wrote these things. And we know that his testimony is true. And then he caps it this way. There are many other things that Jesus did, which if they were written in detail, I suppose that even the world itself would not contain the books that would be written. So who knows what all Jesus did that we're not told? We can't possibly know. We're told what we need to know. So people will challenge you. What about the miraculous? How in the world can you prove that? These gospel accounts were written within a generation or two, maybe within the generation immediately following Jesus' death. Who here is going to die for a lie? Who here is going to be tortured and die for a lie? By reputation, although we can't know for certain, by reputation, only John died a natural death of the disciples. Who's going to be tortured and die for a lie? Who's going to go all over the Mediterranean world risking their necks for a lie about those miracles? Because the miracles were the verifiable signs. That's a matter of some logic that people have a hard time getting around. We've got a lot to believe in. We've got a lot of reasons for our faith. We've got a lot of physical things we can look to, yes, but we're people of faith. And the Bible gives us many, many reasons to trust in it as truly an historical document, and the only one that is capital T truth. think we're all done with our time. Appreciate you being here again tonight. Appreciate the invitation.